The morning Matilda Callahan raised her Winchester rifle at the stranger crossing her land, the sky above the Kansas plains was the color of a bruise, purple and heavy, with the kind of summer heat that made the dust rise off the earth like a ghost unwilling to rest. She had been awake since before dawn, as she was most mornings now, ever since Thomas had died. 14 months had passed since the fever took him in 3 terrible days, leaving her with 240 acres of drought-cracked earth, a mule named Percy who had opinions about everything, a 12-year-old daughter named Clara who had her father's stubborn jaw, and a silence in the house so complete it had become its own kind of company. It was the summer of 1874, and the Kansas frontier was no place for sentiment, a fact that Matilda Callahan had learned the very hard way. She spotted the rider from the front porch, still holding her tin mug of coffee that had gone cold without her noticing. He was coming from the south, crossing the creek line that marked the edge of her property, and he was moving with the unhurried ease of a man who either did not know he was trespassing or did not care. Both possibilities irritated her equally. She set the coffee mug down on the porch rail with a deliberate click, walked back through the front door, lifted the Winchester from its place above the fireplace, checked that it was loaded, and it was always loaded. She had made that promise to herself the night after Thomas died and walked back out onto the porch. She raised the rifle to her shoulder and sighted down the barrel at the rider, who was now close enough that she could see he rode a good horse, a sorrel with a wide chest and an intelligent eye, and that he wore a battered hat with the brim turned down against the sun. He had not seen her yet. He was looking at the land around him with an expression she could not quite read at this distance, something between assessment and something else, something softer that had no business on a stranger's face when he was crossing land that did not belong to him. "That is far enough," she called out, her voice carrying sharp and clear across the flat morning air. The rider pulled up his horse immediately. He was good with the animal, she noticed against her will. No jerking at the reins, just a quiet press of knee and a low word, and the sorrel stopped like it had been waiting for the instruction all along. Then he looked at her. He looked at the rifle. And very slowly, with the particular care of a man who understood exactly what was pointed at him and respected it accordingly, he raised both hands clear of his body, palms open, fingers spread, so she could see he was holding nothing. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was low and steady without panic in it, which she noted. Panicked men did stupid things. "My name is Joel Lawson. I have not come here to cause you any trouble. I have come to help you keep this land." Matilda kept the rifle exactly where it was. The sight bead was centered on his chest. Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken since the night she buried Thomas, when she had stood at the grave alone because Clara was asleep and she had not wanted to wake her, and she had made herself a list of promises, quiet promises said to the dark Kansas sky, about what kind of woman she was going to be from that night forward. "That is an interesting thing to say to a woman who has a rifle pointed at you," she said. "Yes, ma'am, it is," Joel Lawson agreed. "I figure if I were not honest about my reasons right away, the conversation would go a good deal worse for me." She studied him over the barrel. He was somewhere in his early 30s, she judged, with a face that had been weathered by years of outdoor work and maybe something harder than outdoor work. There was a scar that cut through the left side of his jaw, faint but there, and his eyes were a clear, pale gray that caught the early light and held it. He was not a small man, broad through the shoulders and long in the leg, but he held himself still now with a patience that did not feel performed. He was not afraid of her exactly. He was being careful of her, which was different, and she found the distinction curious enough to make her listen further. "Start talking," she said. She did not lower the rifle. Joel Lawson, hands still raised, took a slow breath. 3 weeks ago, a land agent by the name of Hector Crane filed a claim disputing the eastern boundary of this property with the county land office in Abilene. He is working for a man named Silas Greer, who is trying to consolidate land in this county for a railroad contract. If the dispute is not answered in person by the property holder within 60 days of filing, which would be approximately 42 days from today, the county will default in favor of the claim. That means you would lose roughly 80 acres of your best water access land. Matilda's jaw tightened. The eastern boundary. The creek ran along the eastern boundary. Without that water, the rest of the property was barely worth the paper the deed was printed on, and everyone who had ever set foot on Kansas grassland knew it. "How do you know this?" she said. "I am a land attorney," he said. "I practice out of Abilene." "A neighbor of yours, a man named Gerald Foss, about 6 miles north, came to me with a similar dispute from the same Hector Crane 2 months ago. I helped him keep his land. When I was riding back from filing his settled paperwork yesterday, I came through here and recognized the boundary markers. I looked up the filing this morning. It is real, and it is moving." Matilda held the rifle steady for another long moment. The morning wind moved across the grass and the light was changing, going from purple to gold at the edges of the sky, and somewhere behind her in the house she could hear Clara beginning to stir. She made a decision. She lowered the rifle. She did not set it down, but she lowered it so the barrel pointed at the ground, which in her estimation was an invitation to continue the conversation and nothing more. "You can step down from that horse," she said, "but you come up to the porch slowly, and you keep your hands where I can see them until I decide I trust you. I have not decided that yet." "Yes, ma'am," Joel Lawson said, and there was something almost like relief in his voice, though he kept it contained. He swung down from the sorrel with the easy movement of a man who had spent a great portion of his life on horseback, and he led the horse forward by the reins, walking slowly, hands loose and visible at his sides as she had asked. Matilda watched him come. She was 31 years old, and she was not the sort of woman who was easily impressed by a man simply because he was capable and calm. She had been married to a capable, calm man for 9 years, and she knew exactly what that was worth and what it was not worth. But she was also a practical woman, and a practical woman in her situation, facing the loss of her water access, needed a land attorney more than she needed her suspicion. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. Up close, those gray eyes were more complicated than she had expected. There was intelligence in them and something else, a kind of attentiveness that she noticed with a faint discomfort, as though he were actually looking at her, not merely at a problem he had arrived to solve. "You said your name is Joel Lawson," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I am Matilda Callahan. This is my land. My late husband Thomas Callahan filed the deed in 1869, and I have held it in my own name since his death 14 months ago." She said this last part with complete steadiness, because she had learned that any hesitation when she stated the fact of Thomas's death allowed other people to fill the pause with their own interpretations of her situation, and she had no patience for anyone's interpretation of her situation. "If what you are telling me is true about this land dispute, then I need to see it in writing. I do not act on what strangers tell me." "I would not expect you to," Joel said. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat, watching her see him do it, and drew out a folded piece of paper. He held it up. "I brought a copy of the filing from the county office. I made it myself this morning before I rode out." Matilda came down the porch steps and took the paper from his hand without getting close enough for it to require anything other than the transaction. She unfolded it and read it. She was a careful reader, having taught herself from Thomas's law almanacs and the county newspapers over the years, and she read the filing twice, because the first time she felt a cold anger rising in her chest that made the words blur slightly. It was exactly as he had described. Hector Crane, acting as agent for Silas Greer of Greer Land and Development, was disputing her eastern boundary, claiming the original survey had been improperly conducted, and that the true boundary line placed the creek and approximately 83 acres of riverside land outside her legal holding. The filing date was 3 weeks ago. The language was professional and dense and clearly written by someone who knew land law, and intended to use that knowledge as a weapon. She folded the paper back along its creases with precise, deliberate movements and looked at Joel Lawson. "Come inside," she said. "I will make fresh coffee." Clara was sitting at the kitchen table when they came in, a book open in front of her and her dark hair still braided from sleep. She looked up at the stranger with her father's direct, assessing gaze and said nothing, which Matilda privately appreciated. "This is my daughter Clara," Matilda said. "Clara, this man is Joel Lawson. He is a land attorney from Abilene. He came to tell me about a problem with our property that we need to discuss." Clara looked at Joel with the frank evaluation of a 12-year-old who had spent the past 14 months watching her mother handle everything alone and had developed strong opinions about who was worth her mother's time. "Are you going to help her?" Clara asked Joel directly. "That is what I came to offer," Joel said. He looked at Clara with the kind of straightforward, uncondescending attention that children can always detect and always remember. "But it is your mother's decision whether she wants my help or not." Clara looked back at her book. "I think she should let you help," she said, and turned a page. Matilda set the coffee pot on the stove and did not remark on this. She and Joel sat across from each other at the kitchen table, with the filing between them and the coffee steaming between their hands, and he walked her through what he knew. Silas Greer was a businessman out of Topeka, not a local man, and he had spent the past 2 years quietly accumulating land along the eastern Kansas rail corridor, sometimes through purchase, sometimes through boundary disputes that were filed in a way that made them difficult to fight without legal knowledge. He had done this to at least 4 other families in the county. 2 had given up and sold. 1 was still fighting. And Gerald Foss had won because he had found Joel Lawson. "Crane is clever," Joel said. "The dispute he has filed against you is technically arguable. The original survey from 1869 does have an irregularity, a compass bearing notation that is slightly inconsistent with the physical marker records. Crane will use that to make the case that the boundary was never correctly established. What I need to do is pull the original homestead records from the land office, cross-reference the physical markers still in place on your property, and have an independent survey conducted to confirm your boundary. That evidence filed before the 60-day window closes should be sufficient to dismiss the claim." "Should be," Matilda said. He met her eyes. "In law, should be is as certain as anything gets. But I believe your case is strong, and I have handled worse." "What do you charge for this?" she said, because she was a woman who had learned that the question of money needed to be asked plainly and early. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him with careful attention, because that pause before answering a money question often told you more than the answer. "I charge a flat fee for land dispute cases," he said. $25, paid when the case is resolved in your favor. If you do not win, you owe me nothing." Matilda looked at him steadily. "That is an unusual arrangement for an attorney." "I have seen too many families lose their land because they could not afford to fight while the fight was happening," he said. "I find the arrangement I described is the one that allows me to do the work I actually came west to do." Clara turned another page of her book in the silence that followed, and outside, Percy the mule made a sound of profound dissatisfaction with the general state of the world. "All right, Mr. Lawson," Matilda said. "I will accept your help." The first survey of the eastern boundary happened 3 days later. Joel arrived at the Callahan property on a clear Tuesday morning with a surveyor's transit, a notebook already half filled with measurements from his research at the county land office in Abilene, and a quieter manner than Matilda had expected, given that most men who came onto her property with any kind of authority tended to expand to fill all available space. Joel Lawson seemed instead to occupy exactly as much space as he needed and no more. She walked the eastern boundary with him herself, because she knew her land better than any surveyor who had never set foot on it, and because she had made it a rule after Thomas died to never send a man to do something she could stand beside him and understand. They walked along the creek line in the early morning, the tall grass wet against their boots, and she pointed out the boundary markers she knew. The split cottonwood that the original surveyor had noted, the stone cairn her husband had built at the southeastern corner in the first year, the iron stake driven into the red clay bank. Joel measured and noted everything with methodical care, crouching at the stake and consulting his compass, writing numbers in his notebook with the concentration of a man who understood that these numbers were someone's life and treated them accordingly. Matilda stood nearby and watched and asked questions when she had them, and he answered every question with the full explanation, not a simplified version, which she noted and silently approved of. "The iron stake is where they will focus their argument," he said, rising from his crouch and brushing red clay off his knee. "They will claim this stake is not original, that it was placed improperly or moved. I am going to need witnesses who remember the original survey." "Caleb Norton," Matilda said immediately. "He was one of the two men who rode out with the first surveyor in '69. He lives about 8 miles west of here. He is 70 years old and sharp as a new nail." Joel looked at her with what she was beginning to recognize as his particular expression of genuine attention, the one where he was actually filing away what she said rather than waiting for his turn to speak. "You know that already. I know everything about this property," she said simply. They walked back along the creek toward the property's northern edge, and the morning opened up around them, the sky going wide and blue and the meadowlarks starting up in the grass. And for a few minutes neither of them spoke because there was nothing that needed to be said, and the silence was, against all of Matilda's expectations, not uncomfortable. She was so accustomed to silence being the shape of absence, the chair at the table where Thomas used to sit, the empty side of the bed, the missing second pair of boots by the front door, that a silence which was simply two people walking together in the morning felt startling and new. "How long have you been doing this work?" she asked. "The land law. About 7 years," he said. "I trained as an attorney in St. Louis, then came west when the Homestead Act started bringing families out here. I saw what was happening to people who had built their lives on this land and had no way to defend it legally. It seemed like useful work." "Did you have family out here?" she asked, and then caught herself, because it was a question she would not normally have asked a man she had known for 3 days, and she was not sure why she had asked it. He was quiet for a moment in a way that told her the question had a weight to it she had not known when she asked. "I had a wife," he said. "Margaret. She died in the winter of '71. Influenza, that bad outbreak that came through the territory." "I am sorry," Matilda said, and she meant it with the particular force of someone who understood what that sentence actually contained. He nodded once, accepting it. "We did not have children. She had always wanted them." He paused. "I have been doing the work since. It suits me to be moving." Matilda thought about that. About the kind of man who turns grief into motion, who uses the forward momentum of useful work to keep himself from sitting too long in the places where the absence lives. She recognized it because she had done it herself furiously after Thomas died, filling every hour with land records and fence repairs and the 100 daily tasks of keeping the property alive, so that there was never a moment with enough quiet in it for the grief to become unmanageable. "Yes," she said, "I understand that." She did not say anything more about it. Neither did he. But something shifted between them in that moment. Something small and quiet and real. The way two people sometimes recognize in each other the particular shape of a wound and feel less alone for having seen it acknowledged. The following 2 weeks were the most complicated and exhausting weeks Matilda had spent since the weeks immediately following Thomas's death, which was saying something considerable. The land case required her presence in Abilene twice, trips that meant a full day's ride each way, and leaving Clara in the care of their closest neighbor, a widow named Agnes Haverstock who lived 3 miles east and whose opinion of men in general was withering, but who had a soft spot for Clara and her books. Matilda also had to write a formal declaration regarding the history of her property, which Joel helped her draft at her kitchen table over 3 evenings, working by lamplight after Clara had gone to sleep. Those evenings were unexpectedly affecting. She had not sat across a kitchen table from a man, working, the lamp burning low between them and the night sounds of the Kansas plains coming in through the open window, since Thomas had been alive. It was not the same thing, she told herself firmly. It was not the same thing at all. Joel Lawson was her attorney. He was there to help her keep her land, and the warmth she felt sitting across from him in the lamplight was simply the warmth of having useful company in a house that had been too quiet for too long. But he laughed at something she said on the second evening, a dry observation she made about the inflated formality of legal language, a genuine laugh, head tilting back slightly, and she felt the sound of it in her chest in a way she did not immediately know what to do with. She looked back at the paper in front of her and kept writing. He was careful, she noticed, to always be correct with her. He asked before assuming. He deferred to her knowledge of her own land and her own situation. He spoke to Clara as though her opinions were interesting and worth hearing, which Clara noticed too, though she would not have said so directly. He had a habit of taking his hat off whenever he came into the house and setting it on the peg by the door, and the simple domesticity of this gesture, a man's hat hanging on the peg by her door, was something she found herself both noticing and actively trying not to notice. Caleb Norton turned out to be everything Matilda had promised. He came into Abilene on a Thursday morning and sat across from Joel in the county land office and described the original 1869 survey from memory with the precision of a man who had been there and who understood that the truth was worth the effort of stating it correctly. He remembered the iron stake. He remembered the surveyor driving it in. He remembered the compass bearing and the trees and the creek level at that time of year, and he described all of it to Joel with the calm authority of a man whose word had never needed decoration. Hector Crane was present at the county hearing, a thin man with restless eyes and a lawyer's habit of watching everyone in the room at once. He looked at Matilda with the particular kind of dismissal that men of his type directed at women who had the audacity to stand in rooms and assert the existence of their legal rights, and Matilda met his gaze with such perfect steadiness that he looked away first, which she found deeply satisfying. The hearing officer, a tired-looking man named Baxter, listened to Joel's presentation of evidence with the expression of someone who had seen this particular game played before and was not impressed by any of the players. He reviewed the survey records, the witness testimony, the physical marker documentation, and the original filing. He asked 3 questions. Joel answered all 3 with reference to specific documents. Crane's attorney argued for 40 minutes about the compass bearing irregularity. Joel rebutted it in 6 minutes using Caleb Norton's testimony and a secondary survey Joel had commissioned independently, which showed the boundary marker precisely where Matilda's original deed stated it was. Baxter ruled in Matilda's favor 4 days later, a written decision delivered by post that she read standing on her front porch in the morning light, and which she read again after she went inside, and then a 3rd time at the kitchen table with Clara watching her. "We won," Clara said. She was not asking. "We won," Matilda confirmed. Clara smiled, which was not something she did abundantly, having inherited her father's economy of expression in that regard, and went back to her book. But she was still smiling when she turned the page. Matilda rode into Abilene that afternoon to bring Joel the news, though she was aware he would likely receive the same decision by post within a day or 2 and did not technically need to be informed in person. She went anyway. She found him in the small office above the hardware store on Main Street, where he kept his practice, a room lined with law books and land records that smelled pleasantly of paper and wood, and the faint ghost of pipe tobacco from the previous tenant. He was at his desk when she knocked and came in, and when she held up the decision letter, his face did something uncomplicated and genuine, a real satisfaction, undisguised, the expression of a man who had done the work he set out to do and was glad of it. "Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan," he said. "Matilda," she said, because they had sat across each other's kitchen tables by lamplight for 3 evenings and gone through her life's central documents together and walked her land together at sunrise, and Mrs. Callahan seemed like an overcorrection at this point. "If you please." He nodded, and something in his gray eyes went quiet and warm in a way she chose not to examine too closely at that particular moment. She paid him his $25 in exact coin from the small savings she kept in the tin box behind the loose brick in the pantry, because she had budgeted for it from the beginning, and she did not like the idea of owing anyone anything, and he accepted it with a simple thank you that held no condescension about the amount or the fact that it had come from a tin box. They stood in his office for a moment in the particular way of two people who have completed the transaction that defined their relationship and are now uncertain what comes after. "I would like to buy you dinner," she said, because she was a direct woman and because it was what she wanted to do, "if you are not otherwise engaged, as a thank you." He looked at her for a moment with those careful, attentive gray eyes. "I would like that very much," he said. They ate at the Frontier Hotel dining room, which was the best restaurant in Abilene in 1874, a distinction that required some generosity of interpretation given the competition. But the steak was excellent, and the pie was extraordinary, and they sat across from each other at a table by the window overlooking Main Street and talked for 2 hours without the conversation ever touching the land case, because the land case was over, and there was apparently a great deal else to talk about. She learned that he had grown up in Ohio, the third of 5 children, that his father had been a school teacher, and his mother had run the family farm alongside it, and that he credited his mother with giving him his understanding of what it actually meant to hold land. He had gone to St. Louis for his legal training on a combination of borrowed money and determination, married Margaret at 24, and come west when the frontier was still raw, and the Homestead Act was bringing families out into a landscape that was simultaneously magnificent and terrifying in its scale. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about meeting Thomas Callahan at a church social when she was 19, and knowing within 2 hours that she was going to marry him, though she had made him wait 6 months to ask because she was 19 and stubborn and thought waiting meant something. She told him about the first year on the Kansas property, how brutally hard it had been, the drought and the isolation and the learning curve of living with nothing between you and the open sky for miles in every direction. She told him about Thomas's death, not the details, but the shape of it, the way grief had restructured everything about how she saw the world, and how she had decided in the aftermath to become the hardest-working, clearest-thinking version of herself possible, because the land needed it and Clara needed it, and she needed it. Joel listened to all of this with the same quality of attention she had noticed from the first morning, the attention that made her feel that what she was saying was being actually received rather than simply heard. "You raised that rifle very steadily," he said, and there was a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Most people pointing a gun at a stranger have some tension in it. I am a good shot," she said. "Thomas made sure of it. He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said, and the simplicity of it, the ability to say it simply without the grief overwhelming the sentence, told her something about where she was now compared to where she had been a year ago. She drove home from Abilene in the late evening with the prairie going dark around her and the first stars beginning to appear, and she thought about Joel Lawson's face in the lamplight of the restaurant, the way he had laughed twice more during the meal, and the way he had walked her to her wagon afterward and stood beside it for a moment, as though the ending of the evening required more ceremony than either of them knew how to provide. "I may need to come out this way again," he had said. "There are 2 other families in this county I believe Crane is targeting for Greer. You are welcome on my land any time," she had said, "as long as you announce yourself from a distance." He had laughed at that, a full, real laugh, and she had clicked the wagon horse forward into the evening and not let herself look back. She did look back, just once. He was still standing where she had left him, watching the wagon go, and she felt the warmth of that long after the lights of Abilene had disappeared behind her. He came back the following Saturday, which she had told herself she was not expecting, and which she had nonetheless baked extra bread for, which was the kind of self-deception she recognized and was somewhat impatient with. He came to tell her about the two other families, the Hendersons and the Pruitts, and to see whether she would be willing to speak to them, as someone who had successfully fought the same claim, and she said yes immediately, because it was the right thing to do and also because she was glad to see him. He stayed for supper. Clara interrogated him over the beans and cornbread with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting an inquiry, asking his opinion on the best law books, whether he had ever seen a buffalo herd, and what he thought happened to a person after they died. Joel answered each question with complete seriousness, which was the only approach with Clara that had any dignity to it, and by the end of the meal Clara had apparently reached a verdict of her own, because she offered to show him the new foal that had been born to their neighbor's mare the week before, which was as high a mark of Clara's approval as existed in her 12-year-old world. Matilda watched them walk out to the fence together in the evening light, Clara talking with both hands the way she only did when something genuinely interested her, Joel listening with his head slightly bent to her level, and she sat on the porch with her coffee and felt something she had not felt in a long time, something warm and complicated and slightly frightening. The way anything is frightening when it comes back after you had given up expecting it. September arrived, and with it a change in the light, a golden, slanted quality that made everything look older and more beautiful at once. Joel had been coming out to the Callahan property once or twice a week through August, nominally for reasons related to the broader Greer land dispute, which was now a county-wide effort that involved 3 families and was being coordinated out of Abilene. But Matilda was a practical woman, and she knew when the nominal reason and the actual reason had diverged, and she could see from the way he looked at her across the kitchen table that they had diverged some time ago. She felt the same way. She was not happy about how certain she was of this, because feeling certain of something regarding a man was an advanced position to be in when you were still figuring out whether you were ready to be in any position at all. She had been a widow for 14 months. She had made a whole life for herself in those months, a hard and real life, and the prospect of allowing that life to change shape again was not a small thing. She went about her work with this question living quietly in the back of her mind. She drove the fence posts along the north field. She harvested the late corn. She wrote letters to the county land office about the broader Greer dispute. She read to Clara in the evenings, novels and newspapers, and the law almanac that Clara had inexplicably developed an interest in. And every few days Joel Lawson came out to her farm, and they sat at her kitchen table or on her porch or walked her land in the early morning, and the accumulated weight of those hours was doing something she could not ignore. One evening in mid-September, after Clara had gone to bed, they sat on the porch together in the cooling dark, and Joel said, "Can I ask you something directly?" "I prefer direct," she said. He looked at the dark land spreading out before them, the stars enormous over the plains, and then he looked at her. "I think you know that my interest in you has gone well beyond the land case. I am not a man who is good at pretending otherwise. I find you extraordinary, Matilda. I think you are one of the most capable, honest, genuine people I have ever met, and I find myself looking for reasons to ride out here that I would not need to look for if the looking were not the real point." Matilda said nothing for a moment. The night breeze moved through the grass with a sound like water. "I know," she said. "I am not saying it to put you in a difficult position," he continued. "You have been widowed for just over a year, and I know that is not a long time. I know that Thomas Callahan was a man you loved, and that his death was a real loss, and I have no interest in treating that as something to get past or get around. But I also believe that life is short, and the plains are wide, and I think pretending I am coming out here primarily for legal reasons has probably become an embarrassment to both of us." She looked at him. The lamplight from the window was falling just slightly across the edge of his face, and she could see the steadiness in him, the same steadiness she had seen the morning she had raised a rifle at him in her front yard. A man who was not rattled by uncertainty, but also did not pretend uncertainty was not there. "Joel," she said, and his name in her own voice felt different than it had in the months of using it. "I am going to tell you something true." "Please," he said. "I love Thomas. I love him still in the way that you always love a good person who was part of your life. But I have been alone for 14 months, and I have been talking to you for 2 of them, and I know enough about the difference between grief and the present moment to understand that what I feel when you are at this table has nothing to do with missing him and everything to do with you." She paused. "I am not a woman who says things she does not mean. I am also not a woman who is ruled by fear of what she might feel. So I am telling you that I do not want to pretend either." The silence that followed had a quality of held breath to it, the particular silence of two people who have said the true thing and are waiting for the world to settle around it. Joel reached across the small distance between their chairs and took her hand, not dramatically, not urgently, just quietly, as though it were something he had been wanting to do for a long time and was grateful to finally have permission. His hand was large and warm, and she felt the calluses from years of riding and outdoor work, and she thought, with the clarity that real moments often carry, that she had not had her hand held by anyone in 14 months, and that she had not realized until this moment how much she had missed it. They sat like that for a long time, the Kansas stars above them and the night full of small sounds, and did not need to say anything else. October brought the Greer situation to its next stage, and it was considerably uglier than the boundary filing. Silas Greer, having lost the Callahan case, and now facing a coordinated legal response from multiple families, apparently decided that the direct approach deserved an attempt before the legal approach failed entirely. 3 of his hired hands, rough men from the look of them, rode onto the Henderson property one afternoon and had a conversation with Ed Henderson that contained thinly veiled suggestions about the wisdom of continuing the legal fight, the kind of suggestions that use property damage and other unspecified consequences as illustration. Ed Henderson came to Matilda first, because she was the one who had already fought and won, and she drove to Abilene with him to find Joel, and then to the county sheriff's office together, where they filed a formal complaint of intimidation against Greer's men. The sheriff, a heavy-set man named Creed who had been around long enough to know what Silas Greer was and what he was not, listened carefully and made notes. "I cannot promise immediate action on this," Sheriff Creed said, with the honest weariness of a man operating inside a system that moved slowly. "But this complaint creates a record, and if Greer makes another move like this, that record will matter." "I know it is not enough," Joel said quietly to Matilda afterward on the steps outside the sheriff's office. "I am sorry. It is the system working as it works," she said. "What matters is that we are using every part of it." She was angrier than she let show. Not at Joel, who had done everything correct and was working himself thin on behalf of 3 families who could barely pay him, but at the casual arrogance of men like Silas Greer, the assumption that people who had built their lives with their hands on land they had legally claimed could be moved out of the way by money, an implied threat when the law did not cooperate. She had seen this logic at work since she was a child, had seen it applied to people who had even less legal recourse than she did, and the injustice of it had a specific weight that she carried in her bones. She said as much to Joel on the drive back, not as an indulgence of anger but as a statement of fact, and he listened and agreed and added things she had not considered, and they had the kind of conversation that 2 people can only have when they are genuinely thinking together rather than simply talking, and she thought that this particular quality of being in conversation with him was perhaps the thing she valued most. Greer made one more move in November. It was cleverer than the intimidation. He filed an appeal of the Callahan boundary decision with the district court, arguing procedural irregularity in the original hearing. It was clearly a delay tactic, designed to keep the situation uncertain and run up costs, but it had to be answered. Joel worked on the response for 3 weeks, spending long evenings at Matilda's kitchen table and 3 full days in Abilene at the land records. Clara, who had by this point appointed herself Joel's unofficial research assistant, and spent Saturday afternoons helping him sort through document copies, with the focused efficiency of a girl who had found something she was genuinely good at, made a significant contribution by spotting a secondary reference in the hearing officer's notes that strengthened the procedural record. Joel told her this directly and clearly, told her that the contribution was real and not a kind invention, and Clara looked at the document and looked at him with her father's dark eyes and nodded once, very seriously. Matilda, watching from the doorway, felt something quiet and complete expand in her chest. The district court dismissed Greer's appeal in late November, finding no procedural irregularity. The Henderson and Prout cases were settled in the same month, both in the family's favor, both using the Callahan precedent as anchor. Hector Crane left Abilene shortly thereafter, his arrangement with Greer apparently concluded. Silas Greer, facing a legal record that made further aggression in this particular county considerably less attractive, turned his attention to other opportunities elsewhere. It was over, the land was safe, all of it. Matilda stood on her front porch the evening she received the final confirmation, the cold December wind coming off the plains, and the sky going pink and gray above the frozen grass, and she felt the particular relief of having fought a long fight and won it, a relief that settled into her bones like warmth after cold. She had kept it. She had kept all of it, every acre, the creek and the cottonwoods and the iron stake in the red clay bank, and she had done it because she had refused to be moved, and because a man with pale gray eyes had crossed her land one early morning and raised both hands and told her the truth. Joel came out on a Saturday in early December, the week after the final settlement. He arrived in the late morning, not the early morning as usual, and he came without a briefcase, without documents, without the transit or the notebook. He brought instead a small bundle wrapped in brown paper tied with twine that he set on the porch rail with a kind of careful deliberateness that told her it was not a casual gift. Clara opened the door before Matilda could, which was characteristic. "The case is over," Clara told him as though reporting news. "We won everything." "I know," Joel said, smiling at her. "I am here for a different reason today." Clara looked at him, then at her mother, with the evaluative intelligence of a 12-year-old who had been watching 2 adults be obvious to everyone except themselves for several months. "I know that too," she said, and went back inside with the serenity of someone who has arranged things to her satisfaction and considers her work complete. Joel turned to Matilda. The December sun was pale and thin, but it was there, catching the light in his gray eyes and turning the sorrel horse behind him a rich warm color against the brown winter grass, and he looked at her the way he had been looking at her for months now, openly and without apology. "Matilda," he said. "Joel," she replied. He picked up the brown paper package from the rail and held it out to her. "This is not a legal document." She took it and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a copy of a law book, Kent's Commentaries on American Law, the 4th edition, and inside the front cover he had written in his clean, careful hand, "For Clara, who has a mind for this," and beneath that in a slightly different, more deliberate hand, "And for her mother, who taught me what it means to keep what you have built." Matilda read the inscription twice. She turned the book over in her hands and looked up at him, and did not attempt to arrange her face into something more composed than what it actually was. "That is a very good inscription," she said, and her voice was not quite as steady as usual. "I mean every word of it," he said. "I have meant every word I have said to you since the morning you pointed a Winchester at my chest." He paused. "I would like to ask you something if you will let me." "Ask," she said. He took a breath, and she saw in him, for the first time, something that was not steadiness but was something adjacent to it, the particular courage of a person who is about to say something true and important and does not know with certainty how it will be received, even when they have good reason for hope. "I love you," he said. "I know that is direct. I know it has been only 5 months. I know you have a life built here and a daughter who is exceptional in land that took everything you had to keep. I am not asking you to change any of that. I am asking if there is a place in that life for me, if that is something you want, because it is what I want more than I have wanted anything in a long time." The winter wind moved across the porch between them, and the horses shifted in the cold, and somewhere in the house Clara was being determinedly quiet with great theatrical effort. "Joel," Matilda said. She set the book down on the rail beside her very carefully, and closed the space between them, which was not a large space but had felt, at moments, like the largest distance in Kansas. She took his face in both her hands the way she had imagined doing for weeks without letting herself do it, and she looked at him close and clear and said, "I love you too. I have known it for long enough that saying it now feels more like admitting what was already true than saying something new." He kissed her, quietly and with the same unhurried attentiveness that was characteristic of everything he did, and the winter sun was pale on the frozen Kansas grass around them, and the sky was enormous above, and Matilda Callahan felt the specific warmth of a life opening forward instead of only looking back. The door of the house opened and Clara appeared in it, looked at them with a satisfaction that she did not bother concealing, and said, "The coffee is ready," and went back inside. Christmas of 1874 was the first Christmas in 2 years that had any warmth to it. Joel came out to the Callahan property on Christmas Eve and stayed through Christmas Day, sleeping in the small back room that had been Thomas's study, and they cooked together, Matilda and Joel and Clara, a proper Christmas dinner with a chicken from Agnes Haverstock's coop and cornbread and canned peaches, and a cake that Clara made herself from a recipe she had memorized from memory, because she was 12 and meticulous. Agnes herself came for dinner, having declared through many previous conversations that she found most men thoroughly unnecessary, but acknowledged that Joel Lawson was a decent exception, which from Agnes was the equivalent of a written testimonial. They sat around the table in the lamplight and ate and talked, and Joel told a story about a Christmas in St. Louis that had involved a runaway milk cart and 3 city councilmen that made everyone laugh. And Clara told him about the book she was reading, and asked him 4 questions about the law that he answered with genuine respect for her mind. And Agnes, who had been watching the whole evening with the critical precision of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know when something was real, said to Matilda while they cleared the dishes together, "He is a good man." "Yes," Matilda said, "he is." "Thomas was a good man too," Agnes said, not as a complication but as a fact stated plainly, the way true things deserve to be stated. "Yes," Matilda agreed, "he was, and I was lucky to have known him, and I am lucky to know Joel." Agnes dried a dish. "Life is bigger than people expect," she said. "It fits more in it than you think it will." Joel asked her to marry him in February, on a clear cold afternoon when the plains were white with a thin crust of frost, and the sky was the particular deep blue that Kansas only produces in winter. He had thought about asking on Christmas, but had decided that some things deserved their own moment, uncrowded by other occasions, and he was right about that, as he tended to be right about the things he gave real consideration to. He had asked Clara first, which Matilda did not know until afterward. He had come out on a Wednesday, found Clara mending fence with a focused practicality that would have been impressive in a person twice her age, and asked her directly if she would have any objection to his asking her mother to marry him. Clara had stopped what she was doing and looked at him for a long moment with those dark eyes that saw everything. "Do you love her?" she said. "More than I know how to properly say," he said. "Do you understand that she is not someone who needs taking care of? She has been taking care of everything herself for a long time, and she is very good at it." "I know that," he said. "I do not want to take care of her. I want to stand beside her." Clara had nodded slowly. "Then yes," she said, "I would like you to ask her." Matilda did not know any of this when Joel came out on that cold February afternoon and asked her to walk with him to the eastern boundary of the property, to the creek and the iron stake in the red clay bank, the place where the fight had begun and ended. They stood there in the winter light, the creek running low and quiet under a skin of ice at the edges, and he turned to face her with the complete, undefended openness that she had come to understand was simply how he was, a man who did not build walls around what mattered to him. He did not have a ring. He told her this honestly, said he had thought about waiting until he could acquire one properly, but had decided that the waiting was false, and the question was true, and the question was more important than any object that might accompany it. "Matilda," he said, "I have spent the last 7 years of my life doing work I believed in and not knowing if any of the rest of it, the part that was not work, would ever feel possible again. Then I rode onto your land and you raised a Winchester at me and told me to talk, and I think my life changed in that moment in a way I am only now fully understanding." He paused. "Will you marry me?" The creek ran quietly in its winter bed. A hawk was turning slow circles far up in the blue sky above them. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, Joel Lawson." He exhaled, and she saw in that exhaled breath everything he had been holding while he asked, the hope and the uncertainty and the love that had been growing all through the months since August. And she stepped into his arms and felt the solidity of him around her and was profoundly, simply glad. They married in April of 1875, in the small Presbyterian church in the nearest town, with Clara standing beside her mother and Agnes Haverstock sitting in the front row with the expression of someone attending an event she has personally approved and will defend against all criticism. Gerald Foss came with his wife, as did Ed Henderson and his family. Caleb Norton came, 80 years old and sharp as ever, and shook Joel's hand with the force of a younger man and told him he had done good work. The ceremony was simple and real, the kind that two people have when they have already decided the important things privately, and the formal ceremony is simply the public acknowledgement of what is already true. When the minister asked if anyone had objection, Clara, who had apparently absorbed from somewhere a commitment to legal thoroughness, said quietly, "No objection," which caused a ripple of laughter through the small church and made Matilda close her eyes briefly in an expression that was half embarrassment and half pure love. Joel said his vows with the same directness and steady voice that Matilda had first noted when he raised his hands in her front yard and told her why he had come, and when she said hers, she said them looking directly at him, and he held her gaze with the particular gray-eyed attentiveness that she had come to love beyond her ability to explain why. They rode home to the Callahan property together in the April sunshine, the three of them, Clara riding the neighbor's mare that had been lent for the occasion, Matilda and Joel in the wagon, the spring grass coming green on either side of the road and the sky enormous and blue above the plains, and Joel reached across and took her hand as they drove and held it the whole way home. Home. It was her land, her property, her deed in her name, and now it was also his home, and the two things were not in conflict because Joel Lawson had never in his life confused help with ownership or love with possession. He moved his practice from Abilene to the town 12 miles south, close enough to work efficiently and far enough that the property remained quiet, and he built a small addition onto the house that summer, a proper study with a wall of shelves for the law books, which Clara helped plan with the authority of someone who had been waiting to have proper shelves for her own growing collection for some time. Life on the Callahan property, which the county tax records now showed as the Callahan-Lawson property, settled into the kind of rhythm that comes when two people who are well matched find the shared shape of their days. Mornings, Matilda ran the farm with the same capable efficiency she had developed over years, and Joel worked from the study on land law cases that had expanded beyond the county as his reputation grew among homesteading families. They ate dinner together with Clara every evening and talked about what they were each working on, and there was never a meal at that table that was not also a conversation. They disagreed because they were both people with opinions, and because the Kansas frontier was full of things worth disagreeing about. They disagreed about fencing strategy and about a particular piece of legal precedent, and once, memorably, about whether Percy, the mule, had any legitimate opinions or was simply obstinate for its own sake. These disagreements were always real and sometimes heated and always resolved, because both of them were people who valued being understood over being agreed with, and who had the capacity to listen even when listening was not easy. In the late summer of 1875, Matilda told Joel that she was expecting a child. She told him in the kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, with the coffee between them and Percy making commentary outside and the summer heat already building off the plains. She had been certain for 3 weeks and had been deciding how to say it for 2 of them, not because she was uncertain of her own feelings, which were a complicated mixture of joy and nervousness and something deeply tender, but because she wanted to say it in the right way, plainly and truly, as she said everything. She said, "I am going to have a baby in the spring." Joel set down his coffee cup and looked at her, and his face did something she had never seen it do before, opened completely, every careful steadiness he usually carried replaced for one unguarded moment by something so purely glad that it made her breath catch. He stood up from the table and came around to her and took both her hands and held them and said nothing for a long moment, because sometimes nothing is the truest thing. "Margaret and I tried for 2 years," he said quietly when he could speak. "She wanted children so much. After she died, I did not think I would ever have this. Neither of us thought we would have what we have," Matilda said. He kissed her forehead and her hands and sat beside her, and they finished their coffee together in the morning light, and it was one of the most beautiful, ordinary mornings she had ever had. Clara received the news with characteristic thoroughness. She asked 3 questions in rapid succession. Would she have to share her room? Would she be expected to help with the baby in a way that interfered with her reading? And what did Matilda and Joel intend to name the child? Having received satisfactory answers on the first 2 counts and been told the third was still under consideration, she returned to her book, then looked up and said, "I am glad," with the sincerity that Clara reserved for statements she considered important, and that was that. The fall of 1875 was full and good. The farm produced well. The water from the eastern creek that Matilda had fought to keep flowing reliable and steady through the harvest months, and Joel took 3 new land cases, one from a family 60 miles south who had heard about his work through Gerald Foss, and another from a family whose situation bore a resemblance to Matilda's own that made him particularly determined. He won both. The third was still ongoing, but the direction was favorable. They had built something that felt permanent. Not rigid, not fixed against change, but permanent in the way that things are permanent when they are built on real foundations, on honest work and genuine love, and the willingness to keep choosing each other in the daily, ordinary, unspectacular way that is the actual substance of a life shared. In November, a letter arrived from Joel's brother Samuel in Ohio, the first contact between them in over a year, saying that their mother had taken ill and asking if Joel could come. Joel looked at the letter and looked at Matilda, and she said before he could ask, "Go. Of course you should go. You are 5 months along," he said. "I have managed this farm alone for 14 months," she said, in a tone that made clear this was information and not complaint. "I can manage it for 3 weeks, and Agnes is next door." He was gone for 19 days. They were long days, not because Matilda could not manage, because she absolutely could and did, but because the house had a different quality without him in it, not the terrible hollow quality it had had when Thomas died, because Joel was going to come back, but a quieter, less complete quality, the way a room feels when someone you love has simply stepped out of it for a while. She wrote to him twice, letters she sent by post to Ohio, and received one back, a letter written in his careful hand telling her his mother was improving, and that he thought about her and Clara and the baby every day, and that Ohio, for all its genuinely adequate qualities, was not the place he wanted to be. He came home on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, riding up the south approach in the thin winter light, and Matilda was on the porch when she saw him come, and she went down the porch steps to meet him before he had even reached the fence, which was unlike her, and which she did not try to make unlike her, because he was home and she was glad. He swung down from the sorrel and she walked straight into him, and he held her with his arms around her and his chin against her hair, and Clara came out of the house and watched them from the porch with the expression of someone who has decided this is satisfactory. His mother recovered. The following spring, in early March of 1876, Matilda gave birth to a boy, delivered at home with Agnes Haverstock serving as midwife with the competence of someone who had brought a significant number of the county's children into the world, and intended to bring this one in correctly. Joel was there, present and steady in the way that he was steady in all things, holding Matilda's hand through the long hours and saying quiet, honest, useful things rather than the empty reassurances that she had no patience for. The boy was born just after dawn, squalling and broad-shouldered, and in Matilda's opinion, already possessed of a formidable will, which she supposed was inevitable given his parentage. Joel held him first, after Matilda, and looked down at the child with an expression that was beyond any expression she had seen on his face before. Something so open and full of a love he had not known was waiting for him that she had to look away for a moment because watching it was almost too much. They named him Thomas William Lawson. Thomas for the man who had first broken this land and loved this woman and left this place in the world better than he found it. William for Joel's father, the schoolteacher from Ohio who had raised his children to believe that knowledge and hard work were the same category of virtue. Thomas William Lawson made his opinions known from the first days of his life, with a directness that suggested he had inherited his mother's approach to communication and was going to apply it without moderation. Clara, who had been prepared to be tolerant of the baby as a general principle, discovered almost immediately that she was actually delighted by him, and could be found most mornings sitting beside his cradle talking to him, with the same serious attention she brought to everything, informing him at considerable length about the things he would need to understand about the world, and about the specific geography of the Callahan-Lawson property. Spring of 1876 was extraordinary, the way springs sometimes are on the Kansas plains after hard winters, the grass coming back vivid and the creek running full, and the cottonwoods along the eastern boundary in new leaf. Matilda stood at the eastern boundary one morning in May, the baby on her hip and the sun warm on her face, looking at the land she had kept, every acre of it, the creek and the riverside and the iron stake in the red clay bank, and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who had built something real and held it. Joel came to stand beside her, having walked up the field from where he had been mending the south fence. He looked at what she was looking at, and she saw him see it, the land in its spring abundance, the creek bright and full, the sky enormous over everything. "All of it," he said. "All of it," she confirmed. He put his arm around her, and she leaned against him with the ease of two people who have learned each other's shapes over the months and years of a shared life. And Thomas William reached out one small, determined hand and grabbed a fistful of his father's shirt. And somewhere back toward the house Clara could be heard practicing the French phrases she had decided to teach herself from the dictionary she had received for Christmas, pronouncing them with the focused confidence of a girl who intended to be competent at everything she undertook. In the years that followed, the land grew with them. Joel's practice expanded steadily, and he became known through a wide stretch of the eastern Kansas counties as the attorney who went after the Greers of the world on behalf of the families who could not otherwise fight them. He won more cases than he lost, and the ones he lost he appealed when there was ground for it and documented when there was not, because he believed that even a defeat that was properly recorded was worth something to the people who came after. He argued twice before the district court and once before the state court in Topeka, and the name Lawson in land law circles in Kansas came to stand for something specific and durable. Matilda ran the farm with the same competence she had always brought to it, but now with the advantage of a partner who could take half the fence line while she took the other half, who understood the finances and the land records as well as she did, and who had excellent judgment about the horse market when they were in a position to expand the stock. She did not change who she was in the partnership, and he had never asked her to, and the farm in the second and third years of their marriage produced better than it ever had in the years before, not because Joel had done something she could not have done, but because two capable people working together can do more than either of them alone. She sometimes thought in the quiet late evenings with the lamp burning low and the house asleep around her, exactly who she had decided to be on the night she stood at Thomas's grave and made herself promises. She had kept those promises. She had kept her land, and she had kept herself, and she had kept her daughter, and she had also, beyond what she had promised herself because she had not known it was possible, found the thing she had not let herself look for, a life that was full in all the ways it could be full. Clara was 13 when Thomas William was born, and she grew through those years into a young woman of remarkable capability and a fierce and specific intelligence, the kind that teachers in country schoolhouses rarely knew how to adequately address, but which Joel had taken as a personal responsibility since the first morning he sat at their kitchen table and recognized what was in her. He brought her law books and argued cases with her over dinner and wrote letters on her behalf to a school in Lawrence that had recently begun admitting young women to its preparatory program. And Clara went when she was 16, riding the train east with a trunk full of books and the composed determination of a girl who had been preparing for the world for years and was now ready to meet it. Matilda stood on the platform at the train station and watched the train go and did not cry until she was back in the wagon on the road home, and then cried freely and honestly in the way she did everything. And Joel drove and said nothing and handed her his handkerchief and kept his hand on hers the whole way back. Thomas William, who had not inherited his father's patience for sitting still or his mother's methodical approach to problems, but had instead developed his own approach, which was to go directly at whatever needed doing with maximum effort and minimum preliminary discussion, grew into a boy who loved the land with the uncomplicated totality of someone born to it. He was on the farm with Matilda every morning he was not in school, learning the work the way children learn things when the work is all around them and genuinely matters, which is to say deeply, and without any sense of it being a task imposed on him. He was 5 when Matilda realized she was expecting again, and this time she told him at breakfast along with Joel, because Thomas William had strong opinions about being included in things, and she respected that, even at 5. He received the news by asking immediately whether it would be a boy or a girl, and when told they did not know yet, saying that he had thought about it, and either was acceptable and going back to his eggs. The second child was a girl, born in the fall of 1881, a dark-haired, loud, opinionated girl who they named Margaret Agnes, for Joel's first wife and for Agnes Haverstock, who was present at the birth as she had been at Thomas Williams, and who received the honor with the gruff, genuine emotion of a woman who did not often let herself be moved but was moved by this. Agnes Haverstock had become, over the years, something between a neighbor and a family member, the kind of woman who appeared at necessary moments without being asked, and whose absence from the porch on a given Sunday afternoon would have been a notable loss. She and Clara corresponded by letter from the time Clara left for Lawrence, a correspondence that apparently ranged widely across both personal matters and the state of the nation, and which both women took seriously. Agnes was the first person Matilda told when Thomas William broke his arm falling from the fence at age 8, and the first person Joel called for when Matilda had a fever in the winter of 1879 that frightened him more than anything since the legal fight with Greer, and which Agnes addressed with the practical efficiency of someone who had dealt with frontier illness for 30 years and was not prepared to lose a friend to it. The fever broke after 3 days. Joel had not left the house for those 3 days, sitting by the bedside at night and taking Thomas William out to check the animals in the morning so the boy would have something to do with his anxiety about his mother. And when Matilda opened her eyes on the 4th morning fully present in herself and looked at Joel and said, "You look terrible," he laughed in the particular way of someone releasing something they have been holding for a long time. "You were frightening," he said. "I am fine," she said. "You will be fine," he corrected with attorney's precision. "In approximately a week." Agnes said so. "Agnes knows more than any doctor in the county," Matilda agreed, and went back to sleep. She recovered fully and completely, as Agnes had said she would, and the farm and the life and the work went on. Clara came back from Lawrence in 1882, having completed her studies and secured a position teaching at the school in the county town, a position she held with the particular authority of a young woman who had spent her entire life taking learning seriously. She was 20 years old and formidable in the way she had always promised to be, and she came home for Sunday dinners every week and argued law and politics with Joel at the table with a ferocity that Thomas William, now 11 and attentively watchful of everything around him, observed and stored away with his mother's habit of learning by observation. The land case that had started everything was far in the past by then, but its effects were not. The Callahan-Lawson property was prosperous and established, its boundaries documented and confirmed and challenged and defended and confirmed again, its water rights clear and uncontested, its deed in Matilda's name alongside Joel's, the way she had wanted it from the beginning, and the way he had always thought was right. The two families Joel had helped alongside Matilda's, the Hendersons and the Pruitts, were still on their land, still farming, their children grown now, and the properties passed down or being passed down, the kind of continuity that the original Homestead Act had promised, and that Silas Greer and men like him had tried to prevent. Silas Greer had moved his operations to Colorado and then to Arizona, always one step ahead of the legal complications that seemed to follow his methods, and Joel tracked him loosely through professional networks, not with any plan, but with the awareness that men of that type tended to return to useful territories. He never returned to Kansas. The record that Joel had built in those first years apparently made it clear that the cost-benefit analysis was unfavorable. Matilda thought about all of this on a particular September morning in 1882, standing at the eastern boundary of her property, where the iron stake still stood in the red clay bank, the creek running clear and steady beside it, the cottonwoods gold at the edges in the early fall. She was 39 years old. She had gray beginning at her temples that she did not trouble herself about. Her hands were strong and calloused from years of work, and she was, in the most complete sense she had ever understood the word, home. She heard Joel coming through the tall grass behind her, his footsteps familiar after years, and did not need to turn to know who it was. "Thomas William wants to know if you will ride the south fence with him this afternoon," Joel said, coming to stand beside her. "I will," she said. "What about Margaret Agnes?" "Still trying to convince Percy that cooperation is in everyone's interest," Joel said. "Percy remains unconvinced." Matilda laughed, which she did easily and often now, which she had not always. "Percy has never been convinced by anyone in his life." They stood together at the creek line in the September morning, the land open around them in every direction, the sky as wide as it had ever been, the tall grass moving in the wind the way it had been moving since before either of them was alive and would keep moving long after. And Joel put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they looked at the land together. The land she had refused to give up, and he had come to help her keep. The land that had made them, in some real sense, who they were to each other. 8 years, he said. 8 years, she agreed. You raised a rifle at me, he said, with the particular amusement he reserved for the story which he loved to tell and which she tolerated being told because she loved the sound of him telling it. You raised both hands, she said. I thought it was either very brave or very foolish. It was probably both, he said. Yes, she said. It probably was. Margaret Agnes appeared at the far end of the field, running flat out with the exuberant confidence of a 1-year-old girl who had recently discovered that running was possible and had not yet discovered its limits, which in her case appeared not to exist, with Percy ambling resignedly behind her at a pace that suggested he had accepted his role in her worldview. Thomas William came behind them both, long-legged and easy-moving, his father's hat on his head, already beginning to look like the man he was going to be. Clara's horse was tied at the house fence, which meant she had ridden out for Sunday in the way she did most Sundays now, and she would be inside making coffee with Agnes, who had arrived early as she always did, and the house would be full of voices and the smell of coffee and whatever was on the stove, and the land would stretch out from the house in every direction, safe and held and whole. Matilda looked at all of it, her land, her family, the life she had built and fought to keep, and then, beyond all expectation, found a way to fill more completely than she had known was possible. And she felt something that was beyond happiness and simpler than happiness, a deep and specific rightness, the kind that is only available to people who have lived through enough to understand what they have. Joel tightened his arm around her briefly, then released her, because he knew her well enough to know she never wanted to be held beyond the point where it was the right thing, and she looked up at him, and he was watching her with those gray eyes that had always seen her clearly, from the very first morning, not as a problem to be solved or a woman to be managed, but as a person, whole and specific and worth knowing. Come on, she said. Margaret Agnes is heading for the creek. They walked back through the tall September grass together toward the house and the family and the life they had made, and the Kansas sky was enormous and blue above them, and the land was exactly as it had always been and exactly as it was going to stay. Thomas William caught Margaret Agnes before she reached the creek, swinging her up with the easy strength of an 11-year-old brother who was accustomed to this particular challenge, and her shout of outrage carried clearly across the September morning, full-throated and indignant and completely alive, and Matilda and Joel looked at each other, and the look between them contained everything that did not need to be said. Inside the house, Clara and Agnes were arguing about something from the sound of it, amiably and loudly in the way they always argued, and Percy the mule stopped outside the fence and regarded the entire Lawson family with his deep and characteristic skepticism. And the morning opened bright around the Callahan-Lawson property, its borders clear and its water running and its deed resting in the strongbox behind the loose brick in the pantry. Next to the family Bible where Matilda had written in her careful hand, beneath Thomas Callahan's name, the names of the family she had kept and the family she had found and the land that had held them all together. Joel Lawson, married April 1875. Thomas William Lawson, born March 1876. Margaret Agnes Lawson, born October 1881. And above all of them, in the line she had added last winter on a quiet evening, in ink she had taken care with, this land was kept.